Hello, and welcome back to United in Action. My name is Steve Chiu, and I'm delighted to be joining you here as your host. Today, we're finding ourselves in Massachusetts at the Boston City Service Center, which is found in a historic landmark church built in 1827. We'll be having conversation today with Marium Husain, who is the president of the Islamic Medical Association of North America, alongside with being one of our co-organizers at the Holistic Climate Solutions Summit. We'll be thinking about what the role of faith traditions plays in creating better food systems for all and reflecting on the role of planetary health to safeguard our future together. Now come on inside with me and let's meet Marium. Welcome to United in Action, Marium.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's so exciting to have you here after a whole month of us finishing the Holistic Climate Solutions Summit and to be able to be here in Boston with you once again to not only reflect on all the cool things we did, but everything that is to come. So maybe just for starters, would love to hear what are some of your reflections that came out of the Holistic Climate Solutions Summit. You were there with us organizing on the ground and really being able to participate in that space. How did you feel?
Well, first of all, I have to say you did an amazing job for doing the entire thing and to the whole Suchi family for it. It really was one, I think I told you this before too, but I felt like out of any other conference I've gone, it felt like home. And that's not to sound cheesy or corny, but it really was such a space you guys had created in all this chaos, right? That is a city, any city. And you could really center yourself and be present with the speakers, with the audience. And it was weird, you could, sometimes you need an extra time to debrief, right? But I feel like we were able to do both at the same time. And so I just really want to thank you guys for that opportunity and creating that space. And then I think the other thing too, because I had gone to another event I was telling you about that where it highlighted more of the dark reality, right, that we're facing right now, and being able to come back home to the HCSS and be with people who, of all different walks of life, faith, everything, that we could all be centered and gathered around one common goal, which was just caring about the earth, right? And trying to maintain this unified home that we all have, that I feel like were some of the biggest takeaways from that.
For sure. I think there's something about this nonprofit space that attracts different types of interests, right? Some people want to profit off of crisis, others really are here to help. And so being able to curate a space where the helpers were together was so powerful. And I know we'll reflect a little bit specifically about the MENA Women Coalition and having them present. But maybe before we get into that, why are we in Boston?
I don't know. No.
What brings us here? Yeah.
So it's really exciting. Thankfully, because of the work that IMANA has been doing, right? So the organization that I'm involved with, that we were able to connect with the Planetary Health Alliance, so PHA. And that has been organized through Harvard University and a lot of their co-sponsors. And that they were hosting their annual meeting this time, and they were asking about side event abstracts. We had done a lot of side events through the MENA work as well with FFC. And it was almost that audacity, right? That it's hey, if we've done something like this before and it's been successful, why don't we try in another venue and another audience and space? And so thankfully it got accepted. And it turns out we're the only spirituality focused topic, I guess, or session at the entire PHA. So that's really exciting too. It's been really validating in that way. What we're doing actually matters and it's resonating with people, and then there's a space for it. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is just continuously, I think, to break down different barriers, right? Where we think we can't enter, or where we think that maybe there isn't a space for faith, but I think this just shows that people are hungry for that, I think, and hungry for different solutions. Yeah. And so that's why we're here in Boston.
Yeah, I love it. I know participating in the Planetary Health Alliance's annual meeting for the past couple of days has been really interesting for my side too, because we're seeing that they're speaking a lot about solutions, but there's such a challenge in like connecting with communities to communicate like these behavioral changes that are needed to shift us towards like lifestyles, systems that are more aligned with planetary health. And like they're constantly asking this question at the PHA of who are the storytellers who are able to help us change these behaviors and create a sense of comfort enough that people are willing to like risk taking action, right? And I think like us as faith-based organizations and people that are like spiritual as well have this like innate connection to communities that is very much needed in those spaces.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic point, yeah.
And I think like maybe coming to this idea of like what it means to build a sense of a better home, right? I'd love to also explore with you this question of like, what is planetary health? Like, why do we care about, as faith-based organizations, not just taking care of our own people, but like the broader like humanity plus all of the animals, plus like the ecosystems that we exist in, like why planetary health?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's something that, yeah, exactly like you're saying, I think planetary health just gives a name, right? Like One Health or planetary health to what faith-based organizations and faiths have done and are doing on a daily basis, right? So I won't try to get too dogmatic or about it, but in terms of just even if you think about creation in general, right? That what are humans, right? If you want to just say very blandly that if they're creation, then anything that has been created, right, has that same importance and that same value. And one thing that we're recognizing, and it's not even, let's say you don't even need to have a faith, you have to ascribe to a faith or something to believe that, but it's just kind of see what's going on around us, right? That when you don't respect animal life or plant life or biodiversity, ecosystem preservation, you're starting to see that entire countries, or a third of countries, are being underwater, right? That we're having worsening drought conditions. And then, of course, there's this human nature that gets exacerbated during these stressful situations. And then you cause man-made disasters that then ripple down effects of natural disasters. So, for example, Eastern Africa being compromised by the war on Ukraine, right? So I think that it's one of those things where there is a certain morality, ethics, and spirituality to wanting to protect the environment and having this feel-good moment about that. But there's also a very stark reality where if we divorce ourselves from nature and our relationship to other creation, we're unfortunately and inevitably going to hurt ourselves, right? And that's based on science, that's based on faith and spirituality values, all of that. It's just, you just have to look around to see when you don't focus on that. And again, it's just putting a name. We can put whatever name you want to it. Right now, planetary health is the right name for the moment.
Yeah, and I love that, like what the space that we sit in is to know that this wisdom has existed, right? For millennia, and that it's in this moment that like the tide is catching up and like we're really in this zeitgeist of like this is what everyone's interested in. But as faith traditions, we've known that we are interdependent, that we are interconnected. And so in this moment of like the deterioration and erosion of like the capitalist dream, right? Where like you can just fixate only on money and money alone and that will get you your happiness. I think there is a true hunger to say like, if money can't solve all our problems, what can? And to realize that there's these like immaterial underlying like values that like really hold us to each other and to our planet.
Right, and you can't quantify that, right? And sometimes there aren't metrics to that. This is how, going back to our past conversation.
Right. And it's hard, right? Because like we exist in this world that demands everything be measurable and like that you can like put a number or value on it, right? Like how do you quantify like an interpersonal relationship, right? To say like, is there like a money value to that? And like where can that? I thought our friendship was better than that. But like to then come into spaces that really heavily emphasize like at the UN, right, where it's like data drives action, right? And without data, like what can we do, right? But then to say like that we don't just want to innovate on a technical level, but we have to innovate on a societal and ethical and moral values like level, and coming in rather with empirical data than to say like that we're coming in with these like values that underpin and inform the work that we do.
Such a good point, yeah. I like that.
But I think like coming then to like beyond just the Planetary Health Alliance's annual meeting, thinking about like the work that we're doing as the Faith and Food Coalition, right? I'd love to like hold space for us to reflect on that too, because we're coming up on COP27. We're bringing MENA, women of faith voices into that space. We're also like thinking about things beyond this. And I would love to hear like from your side, like what is the value of bringing this faith voice to food systems transformation and its nexus with climate, right? You've spoken about like this inevitability of disasters. Would love for you to expand.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good point. I think it probably just relates to like what we've been saying, right? That indigenous/faith wisdom that's been out there. It's just a matter that those voices, for whatever reason, I think have just been clamped down, suppressed, whatever word you want to put on it. And it's just, what is the thing where like old is new, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, has just been a real proud moment for me, right? That where we're not elevating ourselves, right? But we're elevating those voices and also that wisdom that is there, that is just needs a platform for people to hear it. And so with the MENA Women Coalition, so Alma Lakhdari, right, who has been spearheading that with us, she single-handedly, and there were a lot of passion, was able to bring like 9-10 women from different MENA countries. And you realize that there's nothing exotic, right? And there's nothing, and I say this in like the best way possible, like there's nothing special either, right? Like there's some sort of like, like where you have to, I'm trying to think of the word that's to best describe it, where you almost like, make them less human because you're trying to like elevate them to this like superhuman type level that, we need those type of people to be able to help us out of this problem. Or heroize people, I think maybe that's what I'm trying to say, is that they just bring women who know what's happening, who love their family and love their communities. And that has been the diamond in the rough, right? Nothing like out of this world or in space that we're gonna find our way out of this, right? That the solutions are right there. These people know what the solutions are. And when they come together and talk to each other, they bicker, they laugh, they joke, and they get along the same way that you or I would, right? And so I think that's been the most beautiful humanizing thing, is that you humanize these people, not to something where you make them, where they can't be their whole human self, and then where you don't hide them either and ignore them, right? And so that is what I feel like this MENA Women Coalition has been able to do, and this models of empowerment that you talk about a lot, that they are able to really change, I think, the paradigm, right? And the current narrative too, that there's only one way out of a solution, or that there's a particular developed country stereotype that is going to save us out of this. And so they directly counter that, which I think is really exciting. And I'm just looking forward to hearing more of the solutions, because they're probably extremely simple. And if they were just funded and given that opportunity to scale up, we could see revolutionary changes.
Right. And I love this idea of like humanizing the change makers, right? And similarly, I think something we strive to do with United in Action, something that we look to do more broadly within Siji's work as well, is really how do we bring this human element back into these very cold spaces, right? Like coming to COP, we're going to be like holding a side event at the Food for Climate pavilion, where we're bringing these MENA women's voices into the space to specifically speak their truths, right? And to show how they are already working on the ground to create catalytic change in their food systems, right? But then also to show the problems that come with that, right? That this change isn't without burden and without sacrifice, and that in order for these changes to be sustainable, that more support from the local, national and international communities needed, right? And like coming to this idea also of like, what does it mean for us to like really lift up wisdom of old without tokenizing it, right? And like to say that we are co-creating it together has been an exciting model that the Faith and Food Coalition has been using to ensure that this regional dialogue is strong.
Right.
within the MENA region. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I think it also then gives, like we talked about this too, is agency, right? When you give agency to people where we're not giving them talking points, right? Or being like, hey, this is what you do, because they already know what they need to do, right? And it's just that platform. And one thing too, just even, that came off of the HCSS as well, just to throw that out there as well, this countering narrative, is that so much of what I was talking about, right, the voices being clamped down or given one specific stereotype, that one of the things the women really struggled with is that whenever you talk about anything Muslim or in the MENA region, automatically the first thing is, okay, well, what about oppression in Islam or terrorism or something? Almost specifically was talking to me about this. And then it's like, look, that's not our narrative. Right. That's what someone else is doing. And then, but the sad part about that is that then clamps down creative potential and agency. So then you're only forced into one silo and one area that you have to defend nonstop, right? Whereas again, when you talk with the women, religion doesn't even come up. This interfaith group, all they talk about is food, again, and their kids, their husbands, right? Like the everyday normal people things. And so, again, I think it just adds to that part about just humanizing people with that, and that this is a collective human struggle. And ironically, they're going through stuff right now, right? Where they're feeling the effects, but we're not that far off from it, right? If we don't stop, and then our stories will become their stories.
Yeah. I think to give sovereignty and agency in a moment like this is the way forward. Yeah. Right? Like, as we head towards COP, one of the things that we're very scared of is that there is just top-down decision-making paradigms where local communities are brought in and said, okay, consult with us, and then we will in turn perhaps listen to a little bit, but we're gonna make the final decision, right? And to flip that paradigm on its head and say, this is the way forward, that the future is local, is really how we see the vision of building a better world, right? Yeah. And so I know one thing I would love to explore more with you is what is this role of faith in food systems, right? Because we talk a lot about our relationship to food within our faith traditions. There's some values that underpin this, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in this space as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, and it's one thing I was thinking of for the PHA meeting too. It's just that these problems that we're dealing with, right, specifically food systems. I think sometimes people look at them two-dimensionally or even one-dimensionally as well too. And you realize just how multifactorial, multidimensional these wicked problems are, right? And what I would say that the role of faith is that it's not some panacea, but it's one part of a solution, right? Or it's one dimension to the problem. And so if you truly want to look at a problem holistically and actually improve it, right? You have to bring in that faith voice because that is so individual to the person, but then also so special to the communities as well. And faith and culture get very intertwined and messy in that in good and bad ways. And that you can't, when you talk about behaviors, right, and cultures, you can't sometimes break behavior until you address a faith or cultural aspect to it, right? And so I feel like us having this really interfaith, comprehensive focus on food systems, that is where I feel like the role of faith is that you can use it in conjunction and integrate it in with other solutions to really drive home a holistic change.
I like that. Faith as a key to change, but not the only key, right? And because oftentimes we're not at the table, we're left out of solutions. And then as a result, solutions aren't sustained, right? Behavior change doesn't necessarily move forward in the same way. Would love to then think about what does it mean to localize, right? We're operating very much on a global scale, right? The Faith and Food Coalition, in the work that we've been doing in consultation, in the past 2 years for the Food System Summit and beyond, has really been surveying different faith actors around the world, right? To hear what are your stories, what are your solutions? And that's a very global thing, right? But if the future is local, if we're doing some of this regional work right now, how do we see on the local level, faith playing an important role?
Yeah, so I think we showed that really well, which is exciting. The dialogues that we held in the lead up to the UN Food System Summit, that you saw that everything is we're kind of focusing global right now, but I think that it's almost where you like being able to do things regionally or even locally, right? That it's so much harder, to do it that way as well too, because everything is nuanced, right? And then there is no one size that fits all. And I think that that's why the work that we're doing slowly but surely, right, is able to create a model with which other organizations can hopefully use to be able then to really create that change. Because, for example, like there was a speaker at Kenya today, right, that she was talking, but even within different, so you could have a solution for Kenya, but then even within different farming communities, even with different geographical areas, like for example, Najat, who had spoken about during one of the dialogues, the issues that they face are entirely different than the other community that's a few miles away. And a lot of that is faith related and culture related too. And so it's not going to be easy. There's not one solution or one roadmap that we're going to have to follow. But I think that is critically that is the pinnacle of where this work has to come from and be elevated at, is because we can do these grand statements and everything that we want to do, but if the people on the ground are not going to enact those changes, then everything that we're saying and doing is for naught, right? And then that's exactly what is happening right now. Right. And I think that that's the problem, is that we can continue to do what we're doing, but then we're going to be the same place that we were, if not worse, right? And that there is something where you can look at it that, is the sum greater than its parts, right? And I think that and there is some validity to that, but it doesn't make sense if the parts are broken and the parts aren't talking to each other. Yeah. And if some parts are getting clamped down by other ones, right? And so that's you have to look at the forest through the trees, but you have to make sure that each individual tree is doing well also.
Right. I love this. So there's like 5 things from this, right? And we'll draw them all out, and you pick where you want to lead, right? Yeah. But the first of just siloing, right? Are the parts talking to each other? And as faith-based organizations, I think we're very intersectional in nature. And so being able to cut across these different silos and say that things are connected, right? Health has a deep impact to food, which has a deep impact on access, which has a deep impact on equity, to all of these different spaces need to be in alignment, right? So faith as convener, powerful thread and narrative, right? Then there's this conversation around we're so busy, right? Everyone in the international community is doing so much work. Food systems is a buzz, right? But are we doing this work to perpetuate the status quo, or are we ushering in real transformation, right? And how do you tell the difference? Right. Then there's this question of inspiring action, right? So we know that there are a lot of good words being said. That's one thing that Tzuji's really interested at COP27 as well, right? Where we're making commitments. Those commitments aren't being held to action, right? And how can we really inspire action from words alone? And then finally, this question of nuance of local. If everything in the local is so nuanced, what are the wisdoms that come from our faith traditions that guide us to make the right choices?
Ooh, that is a good question. And I think the answer to that is yes.
You can't yes me for everything.
Then the answer really, because I think that so I can only really speak to Islam, but I think the other Abrahamic faiths as well too, and I would assume others as well, that a lot of it is storytelling, right? Is what it kind of comes down to. A lot of the Bible, a lot of the Quran is stories of people that went through a lot of hardships, and what did they learn from it? And then what were the consequences of different actions, good or bad? And I think that, again, just speaking from a place, an Islamic standpoint, that those stories are not meant to just be bedtime stories or something, but they're meant to belie greater principles, right? Where it gives the person, the reader, the believer, whatever, agency in terms of how they chart their own life and then the decisions that they're making. Because there is, again, even within faith, right, or a book, there is no one book for every single potential life course that a human could go through, right? But if you're given tools, just like I would imagine a parent does to a child, that if you give tools to that person and say hey, when you're confronted with anxiety, fear, uncertainty, stress, love, whatever, here are some tools that you can use. And that I think is such a beautiful gift that we're given, because we have the power with those tools to create boundless synergistic potential, right? For good and bad, right? And that part is up to us. But I think the tool, so that's why, like, jokingly I'm saying yes, but I really do feel like the answer is there because the tools are there within faiths, and that we can use that to individualize nuances within any other community, because you have the foundation. It's just a matter of applying it now.
Right. And I think that also speaks a little bit to this question of like, how do we inspire action, right? If the tools aren't there, like, or the tools are there, but they're not being used, it's very difficult to like say that like you see where you want to go, but you don't know how to walk there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe that's a role that, you know, people like us, right? Like the Faith and Food Coalition, that's what we're trying to do, empower people to like see what those tools are.
Yeah, I love this. So in closing, final thoughts on your side, any takeaways that you want to impart to our audience in terms of thinking about their own belief structures, thinking about how their relationship with food is. Happy to hold the space for you.
Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for having me and being able to do this. I guess I would just say that, again, as a scientist, person as well as someone of faith, I know one thing that I always used to say to you guys in the beginning was just the thing I want out of this is just for faith to be at the table, right? And so much of what I do, in medicine is science, but there's always something where I'm like, there's a missing link. And usually what ends up filling that gap for patients or for anything is some faith, right? That like, I really hope this works, you know? And so I think that's what I kind of just want to leave people with, is that there's no one size that fits all. And this merging of science and faith could be extraordinary, right? And this amazing synergistic outcomes that we could get from it if we don't try to silo ourselves or just try to elevate ourselves, but elevate all of us together through integrating different solutions. So
I love this. We're living in a challenging moment, but so long as we have faith and enough faith to inspire us to take action, there is a better world out there for us. Thanks so much, Marium, for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Suchi. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Well, thank you everyone for watching this episode. We look forward to welcoming you back to Boston once more for our next episode as we continue this conversation around faith values and how these values can help transform our food systems and solutions that are already happening on the ground that bring hope to our future for all. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye-bye.